Welcome to Parchment Update, an interview series from the Parchment Community Library to bring your community closer to you. I'm Karen Woodworth, Library Ambassador. I'm joined today by Cheryl Lyon-Jenness from the Envisioning the River Committee. Thank you for being here today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Well, our topic for today is the removal of the Trestle Bridge. So let's start by talking about why the bridge was there in the first place.
Well, an interesting reason, I think, or probably a pretty obvious reason, it was supporting a railroad. And what is interesting is what railroad it was. It was the Chicago, Kalamazoo, and Saginaw, which was a Michigan-held railroad. It ran in Michigan from the late 19th century until really actively into the 1930s. It came into Parchment as an active railroad until 1968. It was taken over at one time by Michigan Central, and at the end of its period in running, it was a part of the New York Central system. But it was an active railroad. It went through Parchment to Richland Junction, eventually to Hastings, and connected to some other routes along the way.
I find these little local or regional railroads so fascinating. I'm kind of sorry that they're not still here, but the fact is they're not still here. But the bridge has been here for a while, so why take it out now?
Well, it's there were a number of reasons that really went into the decision to take the bridge out. One, I think most residents of Parchment is probably pretty obvious, was its propensity for collecting debris, and that was an ongoing expense for the city to try to cope with that over the years. It was not in good shape, so it could be a kind of a dangerous nuisance, I suppose. But the real reason, and the reason that the city of Parchment got funding to do this, a grant to do this, is the interest in returning the Kalamazoo River to a more biologically sound state. And removing that trestle improves river flow. It improves the way the water moves through the system, through the river system. And so we applied for a grant to an organization or a consortium of organizations called the Kalamazoo River Trustees, who were interested in using funds from a PCB settlement, a contamination settlement, to enhance the biological helpfulness, I guess, of the Kalamazoo River for the benefit of all citizens. And working on that trestle bridge, since it was unused and not going to be used in any foreseeable future, seemed to be a very reasonable way to help the health of the river.
Well, that sounds great. Do you know how long it's going to take to remove the bridge?
Well, that's a real question. It seems this has been a process that's gone on for several years as the river trustees have thought about what they could actually fund and what would be a part of the project. We were delighted to see it getting going this early in the summer. And I haven't seen a recent timeline because they were actually, but probably had to get started to have some real sense of what the problems would be. But our hope is certainly that it will be done by the end of summer. Another part of this project, not so obvious now, but is the building a portion of the trestle will remain, the portion nearest the shore, near the Nybor facility there. And there will be a new observation platform, fishing or observation platform there. And then just to the south of that, with the help of this grant, will be constructed a kayak launch, a much safer kayak launch and a much safer access to the river than has been available before. So a couple parts of the project going forward. This, as soon as they can get that trestle out of there, then the other projects, other parts of the project can go forward.
Okay, so but part of the trestle will stay there. They're not building a new kind of observation point out into the river, or can you say that part again?
They are really using the base of the trestle. As you can imagine, those bases put into to support railroads are fairly serious. And they will use the base, the couple of just close to the shore, the base of the trestle that's there, then to support a new observation platform.
Okay. Well, I have been kind of looking at it as I go by, and the other day I was down there and noticed that the materials were being stacked very neatly on the ground sort of between the bridge and the road. So do you know, will any of those materials be reused or recycled, or have you heard anything about that?
Well, we have no plans as we think about the future development of that area for reusing and recycling them, but I don't know what the company that's doing the removal does. Certainly there's often use for those railroad ties in various areas. They remove the rails themselves, and I'm sure that's recycled. But I'm not aware of any plans in terms of what's going on for the development of that area for the use of those materials.
Okay. All right. Well, I mean, it's always good if they can
If
reuse
they can,
these or
sure.
or sell them and recoup some of the costs of doing this or what have you. So you mentioned some of the things that are planned for the area in the future, the observation point, the kayak launch, habitat restoration. Is there anything else that's going on as part of the long range plan?
Well, we really do. The City of Parchment's Parks and Recreation Committee has been working on trying to envision how that Commerce Lane area, that riverfront park in Parchment, can really be developed in ways that will be appealing to everyone. And we're going to put forth a proposal and seek citizen input to see what people would like to see there. As we work on what would be possible and then work on finding funding for what would be possible. I can just mention a few things that we are thinking about. One of the goals is to make the river more visible there. So there will be, and that this is a part of the ongoing grant going forward very quickly, the removal of invasive vegetation along there. And then hopefully a design for the future that will leave open space so the river is visually accessible to people and a very pleasant place to look at. We're hoping to develop a picnic site at the far north end, so near the new observation platform and the kayak launch in that area, the planting of native shrubbery to form borders in that area, the restoration of some of the overlooks that have been there since the 1980s are in need of just upgrading, of repair and fixing up. And that's a part of the proposal as well. What the real goal is, I think, in all of this is to think about the Kalamazoo River as an asset for this community. Parchment has an amazing amount of access to the river, and to think about what we can do to make that more available to people, more appealing to people, how we can interpret it so people understand the fact that we have this essentially wild river in our midst and we can enjoy it. So I think there's some really interesting ideas kind of perking around and people working on how they can come to be.
Okay, so people should start thinking now about some input and what they want to see, sounds
What they'd
like.
love to see there. Yeah, yeah.
So what's the timeline for the entire project, and what do you think people can expect to see by the end of the summer?
Well, I'm hoping what people can see by the end of the summer is the cleanup of that area that where the trestle has been, a new kayak launch, and the beginnings of development of a kind of change in the way the sidewalk is there, et cetera. So a very pleasant area with some amenities yet to be developed. And then again, as always with these projects in Parchment, we need to find funding to bring them forward. So what we will do is, again, with input, with the thoughts of people in the community, try to think about how we can best use that space and then seek funding to do that. And that will be a multi-year project. There's no question about that.
Okay, well, I'm going to ask you now to kind of look into the future with me and think about 10 years down the road. How do you hope people are using the new features there, interacting with the river?
Well, needless to say, I have great hopes for the river because I think it's an immensely underused resource in this community. What I really hope happens is that this little section of Riverfront Park is very actively connected to the River Valley Trail, which just goes right next to it, right down Mazel. And by signage and by making amenities there that would bring people, draw people into Parchment. The other long-term project that we've all been talking about for a long time is the continuation of that trail on and down along Parchment's riverfront to the west and north, where there's about a mile of riverfront natural area there that has been cleaned up and is ready for trail development that would potentially connect Parchment to the River Valley Trail, go a trail going along the Kalamazoo River to G Avenue, and then winding back eventually through Kindleberger Park and back to the River Valley Trail. So this segment of the Riverfront Park will be a standalone feature that I think people will come to really appreciate, but its potential long-term in terms of Parchment and a resource that could be enjoyed by all people. It's just kind of the beginning, the kickoff, I guess, of what could be a much longer and delightful project.
I like that. Kind of an exciting beginning. Well, before we wrap up today, what else would you like us to know?
Well, just to, I guess, keep your eye on it. The Parchment has a second grant that came from the river trustees called the Development of an Urban Wildlife Corridor, which will connect our areas in Parchment to other areas in Kalamazoo, in Comstock, and Plainwell along the river to enhance and emphasize that this is, again, an essentially wild river. There's all kinds of native plants and animals that live along it, and to kind of document that and make it available to people. So there are some very exciting things kind of bubbling under the surface here that have to do with the Kalamazoo River.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today.
Well, thanks so much for having me.